Hello and welcome. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this short webinar. We've decided to run this to announce the results of the recent e-ballot on the employer's final offer on our four fights dispute, which closed earlier today. I'll pass over very shortly to Jo, who will tell you the results and talk about what this means going forward. She'll also address some of the questions that have been coming into us. She'll then hand over to Paul Bridge, our head of higher education, just to talk a bit of context about the four fights dispute. And then we'll all come back together. Sorry, I should have said Jo Grady, our General Secretary. Apologies, Jo. So I will hand over to Jo now, because I'm sure that's what you will want to hear.
Thank you, Jane. So hi, everyone, and thanks for tuning in. So we wanted to take this opportunity to announce the results this way. And if Ed can bring them up on the screen for everybody now, and I will talk them through. So as you can see, we got a just over 30% turnout, with just about 39% accept and 61% reject. So what I wanted to do was, before we really say anything about what these results mean, is really reflect on the last year. Because I think it's really important to take stock of where we are on this. The whole union put masses of effort into getting the vote out, to organising the strikes that underpin the four fights. Nobody, I don't think, knows this more than me. Obviously, I see this from a member's perspective, but also from the staff side. During the ballot period, I visited over 30 branches over the course of 2 months. This led to me engaging with thousands of members one way or another. And I really saw firsthand the dedication and the commitment from our union's members and our union staff, in our branches, really struggling for systemic change during that ballot. And I saw this on the picket lines that I visited as well in the autumn and the winter. We got our best pay ballot results ever in the four fights in the post-2016 Trade Union Act world. We got roughly 50% turnout across the national average, across all our devolved nations. That compares to 42% on our last two attempts on a pay ballot. And this is really huge. And I think that everybody really needs to take stock and understand that this puts us in a different place than our union's ever been on these issues. We generated more and better press coverage than we've ever had. We didn't really have that moment of the press coming against us, and we got more support from our students than ever before. And for some students, this was the second time in as many years that they'd been on the receiving end of sustained strike action. And there was also a massive amount of enthusiasm for these strikes from members when it started. Branches that had been part of the 2018 USS dispute, in that first wave of action, were reporting that their picket lines were as big, or if not bigger, than during 2018. But not everybody did understand the action they were being asked to take. And I think that there should have been more consultation with members over the strike action associated with four fights. I think it's fair to say, and the result demonstrates this, I don't think anybody is particularly happy with this offer. I don't think we should necessarily assume that those who voted to accept it are happy with the offer. I think the general dissatisfaction is represented in what is a low turnout of 30%. We managed to get 50% of people voting in a postal ballot for action, so I do think we need to reflect on that. And what I also want us to do in this period is really use this opportunity to have a discussion in our branches about what we would like to see, how we're going to achieve that, and how we think we will be prepared to do that. And I think a lot of branches are already there. The branch delegates meeting that informed the HEC that led to putting this offer out to members, it was clear those discussions were already happening. Because I do think we have to be really honest with ourselves. And part of that honesty is that despite our best efforts, despite people getting up at 6 a.m. for 22 days over the course of several months, those 22 days worth of action did not produce the results we want or that we deserve. And I think we need to be honest about that, because if we aren't, we could make the same mistakes again. One of the things I've made very clear, whether it's been in the briefings to the branch delegates meetings or at numerous points during this year to our HEC, our Higher Education Committee, is that I think we need to really considerably switch up our tactics to be successful next time around. We need to plan industrial action much more carefully next time around. That doesn't mean calling action as soon as a ballot closes. And we need to have really crystal clear key points where we check in with members and branches before we escalate that action. I know, because many branches and members emailed me, that people were surprised at the amount of action that was called after Christmas. And I think we need to use the space that we've got now to think really carefully about how we fight on these issues, because I don't think we can just do the same thing again and press the repeat button. I don't think it's going to work. And I think that we should think carefully about holding ballots until we've conducted these activities. I think if there's one lesson that we've learned this year, is that if we escalate action too quickly with the focus just on one main industrial tactic, you know, when our employers move at a glacial pace because they have to consult so many constituent bodies, you know, it hasn't been as effective as it could be. Members, I'm convinced members will vote for action again. I'm convinced we can win gains. But this will require us doing a lot to bring members into the decision-making process that we didn't see this year. And when I say bringing people into the decision-making process, that means much more than just, you know, involving period or touching base with them when we want them to put an X on a ballot, or, you know, sign up to a picket rota or report back from decisions made at a special sector conference. It means genuinely engaging members in action as it happens and as decisions are being taken. And that's one thing I sort of want to be really clear about. And it's something I've been, I think, very clear about when I ran for General Secretary, and definitely was something that I stressed during the ballot tour. We, I think, are going to have to really innovate in how we respond to the challenges we face, but we can do that. And I would like to outline 4 main areas I think we need to think about incredibly carefully if we're going to organise for power and organise to win. And those main areas are ballots. Again, anybody who's ever spoken to me on this area knows that I am in favour of aggregated ballots. As I said, this year, we pretty much hit that 50% turnout threshold. For those of you who are not aware, UK law requires us to carry out a postal ballot for industrial action, and it requires us to hit a 50% turnout threshold. We, UCU, along with a few other unions, are one of the few unions that have consistently been able to do that since these new laws came into power. We have pioneered, we're the only union in the country that's pioneered a particular texting software that reaches members. And I think to not aggregate that ballot, and to not have everybody, and remember whether you're in Sheffield Hallam, Sheffield University, Leeds, Leeds Beckett, everybody goes into one big national ballot. And if we reach over 50% as a union on the whole, everybody can take action. This year and in previous years, we've done a disaggregated ballot where every branch has done their own ballot, and whichever branch manages to get over 50% has been able to take action. Now, what that meant this year was that we had 40,000 members taking action rather than a potential of, say, 80,000 members, that we had 74 branches rather than potentially 150 branches. So I'm a keen advocate of aggregating those ballots, not just because I think we can hit 50%, and I think we have the tools to do that. We've been the union that's pioneered that. But that we need that leverage. You know, if we have all branches out on strike, that is a number of institutions under pressure asking UCA to move. And there's a further concern that I have, which is the growing drift between our pre-92 branches and our post-92 branches. Now, if you are in a pre-92 branch, you will know that you get a big spike in membership when you take part in action. And we've seen a lot of pre-92 branches grow as a result of that and grow in members. We only had a small number of post-92s that hit that ballot threshold in the Four Fights dispute. So our post-92 branches are not getting the spike in membership that we're seeing in pre-92s. They're not being involved in that same activity. And we can't have a situation where the sector is fragmenting based on the branches that are growing and the branches that are not being able to take part in action. So I think a key thing we need to think about and address for next time is an aggregation of our ballot. Related to that is the timing of any ballot and the timing of action. So in addition to the requirement of a 50% threshold, one of the other things that the Trade Union Act in 2016 brought in is the requirement of a window. So when you get a successful ballot, you have 6 months to take action. So the timing of any ballot is important because as soon as that ballot closes, the clock is ticking for 6 months. So the decision was taken this year to have a ballot in September and October, which meant that the clock was ticking from November. Now, if you were involved in the 2018 USS action, you probably understand that one of the reasons we had so much leverage as we went into the Easter vacation is employers knew that there was going to be escalation after Easter. They knew that for certain, and they were quite keen and eager to ensure that some kind of agreement was struck. This year, because of when the ballot happened, by the time we got to the Easter vacation, the mandate was ending. So what employers knew this time was that actually branches would have to put that superhuman effort all over again into getting a ballot threshold to allow them to do action after Easter and into the summer vacation. So in addition to aggregating the ballot so that we can all take action together, we really have to be crystal clear about when we time a ballot and when that action will take place, and to ensure that we have the best window for leverage possible. And that also means, I think, having a really clear conversation about when any action in the future would take place. You know, often people have seen that the spring and summer term are most effective because it disrupts exams. And I'm quite convinced by that. But I think we also need to think about whether or not hitting the beginning of the academic year might work and what that would look like. And we can't do that if we rush into any kind of ballot, in my opinion. What is crystal clear is that we all want systemic change in this sector. We all want to eradicate the moral stain of casualisation. We all want to ensure that Black staff are rewarded properly for their contributions and don't have career paths denied to them. We all want to close the gender pay gap. We all want to stand up for disabled colleagues who are bullied or are performance managed out of their jobs. The ballot turnout this year in 4 fights and the rejection of this offer demonstrates that commitment, and that is something that I'm so proud of. But we need to find the best way to make this stand. And in my opinion, the best way of that is to make decisions that involve everybody, but that also use the whole toolkit at our disposal. And I think that means actually developing numerous and more tools. And this is why I think another issue that I want to talk about is the type of action that we can take. We, as a union, are in the position to really explore the boundaries of what is and isn't considered a voluntary duty. We are in a position to take more legal advice that is detailed for each institution's contract and really work out all the things we can refuse to do as part of our jobs and take that really, really seriously. You know, it could be that ASOS, when drilled down to that level, could be a permanent fixture. You know, we need to mix up our tactics. You know, full-scale action, fine, but there needs to be other things that are woven into that full-scale action, and that points of escalation are there to accompany all the other action and all the other tools at our disposal. I also think that we need to think about what types of events we want to target. Traditionally, teaching events have always been what have been targeted, but, you know, we aren't all teaching staff. You know, we don't all do the kind of classroom stuff. Professional service staff often don't, research staff often don't. And I think we need to think about other activities or events that can be targeted to ensure that we are acting cohesively and that everyone's included. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about organisation and recruitment, because any union is as good and as strong as the amount of members that it has, the density that it has in any sector, and the extent to which those members are organised and mobilised. We have done an enormous job this year. The protest that was launched by this action has been huge. More members than ever have supported it. As I've said, the fact that you've rejected it shows a commitment to real change. But we need to ensure that when we enter into any dispute, that when we go toe to toe with our employers, that we use every tool in the shed. That could be strikes, it could be pickets, it could be blockades, it could be boycotts, workplace actions of all kinds, expressions of solidarity, everything. We're really clear, and I think this has been demonstrated this year, that we have a collective goal, that we're not letting go of that. We have raised expectations through the roof about what people deserve in higher education, about what we can achieve, and that isn't going anywhere. It's just as important now during lockdown. The passions and desires of members have been made clear. And as I said, next time, I think we need to use every tool that we have. The committees that we have need to check in with members at every step of the way. We all have complicated and overwhelming lives, nobody more so than now. And any action that we take in the future has to hold everyone together. There can be no going back, but to move forward, we need to build a bigger union. That does mean higher density in branches, and a whole membership and higher education workforce who expects better from their jobs, believes we can achieve better, and will join any union call for action when we say what we think we need to do to achieve that. I think we can militantly confront our employers and win, but I don't think we do that by simply repeating what has happened this year. And we need to think, therefore, about how we organise for better and how we organise differently, how we organise smarter, and the tactics that we need to win in the future. And we can improve our workplaces, we can improve the governance of our institutions, we can create better jobs, we can have richer relationships with our students and our co-workers, be less intimidated by bullying managers, and know that when we face collective problems, we have a realistic chance of a collective solution. And this is what's going to be achieved, I think, if we really take an all-encompassing, whole member approach to how we do this. As General Secretary, my only ambition is to get the best deal in our sector that we can for you as members. And I think the 4 ways I've just outlined are, I think, the best way that we can do that for next time. So I'm going to finish there, but I'm going to bring Paul Bridge in, who is our head of HE, who probably is going to pick up on some of the other aspects that I didn't really cover. So Paul, over to you.
Thanks, Jo, and hello everyone. I'm going to speak to you for about 10 minutes or so and follow on from where the General Secretary left off and factor in some of the feedback and views I've been receiving over recent months from members and branches in regards to the dispute. But first, I think I'll start with a sort of recap really on the dispute itself and the background to the Four Fights campaign that was launched so successfully during the sort of beginning half of last year. Just to remind us all that the UCU has been in dispute since 2019, on the 2019-20, so last year's negotiating round, since June of last year. So we've been in dispute for about a year now. We exhausted the Nugentius dispute procedure, which is the national agreement that governs the negotiating at a UK level. We exhausted that last summer with no agreement on the imposed 1.8% pay offer that the employers made in April of last year, and also the limited proposals they made in regards to the 3 other elements of the Four Fights campaign. That's on gender and race inequality, precarious contracts and workloads. The UCU negotiators, subsequent to the dispute meetings ending, arranged 6 other meetings with the employers over the autumn period and into the new year to see how far we could push UCIA, the employers' representatives, on those Four Fights elements. It was a very frustrating time. Your negotiators pushed hard on all of those areas, and we made some progress, but clearly on reflection and on analysis, it's some way short of the demands that were submitted in March of last year. During this period, members took part in 22 days of strike action, which is unprecedented for UCU. There was some movement on the pay equality and related aspects of the Four Fights campaign, but there was no movement ultimately on the 1.8% pay rise that was imposed, and there was no agreement on that. The final offer was made, a final offer was made to us in January of this year, and there was a slight revision after a further meeting and some correspondence being exchanged in the April. That April offer is the one that was put out to members in the e-ballot on the basis of the consultation that you've taken part in. By March of this year, it was clear that the unfolding pandemic had changed the employers' behaviour and their perspectives on the dispute resolution phase. Basically, they were shutting up shop and hardening their attitude and not prepared to move further from where they were, well, where they eventually landed. The final offer itself was circulated, as I've mentioned, and branches have had some time to consider that, particularly in the period of lockdown. And during this time, however, the shift in focus that's taken place away from some of the core elements of the Four Fight disputes, they've been sort of taken over by events. However, what we were able to do was organise a series of branch briefings and the branch delegate meetings that took place in May. And they were important milestones in this dispute because they brought branches together, particularly at the branch delegate meetings. And for the first time, we got a consistent set of feedback and questions being asked of the negotiators and of the Higher Education Committee, the committee that was effectively driving the dispute throughout this period. The HEC met in May and considered the outcomes of the branch delegate meetings. However, it wasn't until the June meeting of the Higher Education Committee that the branch delegate meeting recommendations were adopted in full. And one of the immediate outcomes of doing that was the June re-ballot was cancelled and deferred to a special sector conference that will take place in the autumn. Another immediate step that came out of the decision of the June HEC was to consult members in an e-ballot with a recommendation to reject. And the General Secretary has spoken to you about the outcome of the consultative ballot, the turnout of 30%, and the 60-40-ish split in the vote in that regard. I think I'll pause there because I want to now to sort of unpack a few of the things I've said, add a little bit of context, also give some feel for where we are with the campaign and the dispute now. And based on, as I've mentioned at the start of what I was saying, some of the sort of feedback I've been getting and questions asked of me in regards to where we go next that have emerged subsequent to the branch delegate meetings. I want to sort of give you a flavour of where we are with that. And then sort of head into as I see them, sort of three key areas for the bit I'm doing in regards to how the next steps fit around those. The General Secretary has given you her views on the strategic considerations it's timely now that we consider and that should form part of the union's next steps in a range of responses that ultimately it's for branches to determine via the democratic structures of our conference that will take place in the autumn. But it's worthwhile, I think, reflecting on some of the nuts and bolts that go to the negotiations and the disputes that feed into the strategic discussions and considerations that you'll be making in the coming months. I want to briefly comment on the Nugentius national UK bargaining process, the dispute, and the re-ballot, whenever that may be. So in regards to Nugentius and UK level bargaining, the final offer reflects the extent that the employers were prepared to go at a UK level. So that offer that was made to us in the April of last year, revised, and then the final offer given to us in sort of April of this year, that's at the maximum level the employers were saying to us they are prepared to go within the UK machinery that's called Nugentius. For a number of years, the employers have incrementally restricted the scope of national bargaining. And I apologise here because I have a tendency to say national bargaining where I mean UK bargaining. We're not an England-only union. I will refer to UK bargaining and the outcomes that have happened over a series of national disputes, UK disputes, that have resulted in members taking action, significant amount of action, and with a varying degree of success, I think it would be fair to say. There are 147 employers that participated in the 2019-20 New Jinchis round. 74 UCU branches achieved 50% of turnouts in the statutory ballots and then took part in 22 days of action. And Joe's mentioned and commented on this, so I won't spend any time further on that. But the dispute itself, these were a very impressive set of results. And there were a very significant number of strike days. The questions that have been asked rhetorically within the union coming out of the BDMs, the branch delegate meetings and other branch meetings is, after such a significant amount of action, why was it that the employers didn't move closer to UCU? For some time now, I've been commenting on New Jinchis and the state of UK bargaining and the union's relationship to it. And those that have heard me speak at conference would have picked up certain themes, and those that have heard me speak at recent briefings would have heard me also ponder a number of questions about the strategic direction that the union could take and consider as an appropriate set of next steps. Whilst it's very important for UCU to support UK level bargaining, and it is, it's also appropriate that I think we start to consider the strategic choices that are before the union now and how the interests of members are best served. I want to move on now to the dispute itself. The dispute, despite the outcome of the consultative ballot, this dispute remains live. It's effectively paused. What the consultative ballot doesn't do is take us in any direction as a result of that. It confirms that members have decided that they reject the offer. It is now for the autumn HE sector conference to determine the next steps. We need to make sure that the campaign, as Joe was saying, continues, and that the sacrifices of members supporting the action and their determination for a different settlement in higher education remains the top priority for UCU. And you've heard the General Secretary saying that. And what's important now is we get branches engaging in that, as well as supporting them through very difficult times dealing with the pandemic and the effect that's having within branches and members. The key aspect, I think, in supporting branches is in this Four Fights campaign is to ensure that we support you locally in both your negotiations and any disputes that emerge around pay inequality, precarious contracts and workloads. The pandemic has had a huge impact, and we've produced in the team I'm privileged to be part of, we've produced a range of excellent guidance and supporting briefings for branches to deal with not only the pandemic, but also a wide range of other negotiating challenges that you are facing at this time. And I'd refer you to those. They're on our website, and they will enable you to deal with, hopefully, getting some clarity at this really important time in regards to options that you do have if you are considering specifically putting in claims around equality and or precarious staff as part of your response to the COVID impact on your members. I want to now just turn briefly, as I conclude and wrap up what I want to say, I want to talk about the reballot and the position that we found ourselves in when the branch delegate meetings took place last May, where there was an imminency of a reballot on Four Fights and USS at that time, and the decision of HEC in regards to pausing and cancelling that June ballot. The e-ballot consultation result needs some careful consideration. And there are a number of factors that will have contributed to that result and the level of turnout. We know that branches are dealing magnificently with the pandemic, the attack on members' terms and conditions, and the shift to blended learning, and also preparing for the reopening of campuses. These are real live issues confronting you now. Many branches are also dealing with the threat to members' jobs, and that is a priority for UCU. The Jobs First and Fund the Future campaign are resonating and engaging with branches across the UK. We know that there are significant challenges ahead of us. We also know that overcoming the anti-trade union 50% threshold at this time will be a significant challenge. However, this union has an exceptional record in regards to winning ballots. Many branches have developed excellent get the vote out campaigns, and they've shared them. Those resources are available to all, and they are a resource that will be and can be used in the future. However, winning any reballot in the context of the pandemic and devising hard-hitting industrial action is something very new for UCU, and Joe's mentioned a range of options and tools that need to be factored into that discussion, which will be part of the decision-making processes and the debate that will take place at the sector conference later in the year. Calling a UK level ballot without the maximum amount of branch participation in the decision-making process does run high risks. And we found that given the input and the demand for more branch involvement and more member involvement in decision makings, the union has to respond to that. And we have to respond to that in a variety of different ways to enable voice and participation in the key decision makings, with any future action that's called to be one of the key aims and objectives of organising the union around the conference. It's therefore vital that the autumn conference that decides the next steps that we take in this dispute has the maximum amount of branch participation to ensure that members and branches participate and shape then the next steps in this dispute. And I'll leave it there, Ed. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul, very much for that. Just in wrapping up, I think we've got a few closing comments we'd like to make. We've had some comments on the chat about, I think Paul's covered some of that, but, we're in a very, very unique position at the moment. We're in a Paul's dispute around some really important issues to union, but we're also fighting for every job on the ground. And obviously, they overlap. As a lead for casualisation, I'm very aware that part of the 4 fights is a fight to stop the huge casualisation in the sector. And what we're seeing now is an attack on our casualised staff, our members on casualised contracts, when we're talking about, protecting jobs. They've been in the firing line. We're having members losing jobs now. We've got a lot more under threat. And that's obviously a priority for us fighting that. But the casualisation wasn't caused by the pandemic, it was caused by political and management choices. And that's what the 4 fights was trying to address. So it's sort of come to fruition of all the things that we talked about. And when people are talking about the pandemic and the crisis and the workload that's been put onto people as a result of that, that was already a problem. If these things hadn't already been a problem, our reactions to what we're seeing now would be a lot easier to bear. But those decisions that institutions and management have taken over decades to marketise the institutions and to marketise higher education have actually made this a lot worse. But we have had a couple of comments about, how do we fight when this is all going on? And I just wondered if Joe wants to come in and just say something about where our focus will be and how we actually balance the need to continue with the 4 fights and the need to fight for jobs now on the ground.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jane. I think, you're completely right. There's no letting anybody off the hook just because we have a pandemic. As you say, these things are endemic in the sector beforehand. The business leaders and vice chancellors of the sector lobbied for the model that we have now that is crumbling because of a potential dip in student numbers. And obviously cutting staff, and in particular cutting the most vulnerable and lowest paid staff in their institutions, has been the option that they reach for, because it's the thing that they're used to doing all the time. And there's, we're shouting that from the rooftops at the minute and lobbying hard. But I think you're right that, there is a crisis in the sector right now, which is not unrelated to the systemic issues that we've been campaigning for and that we took action over. But they are manifesting in redundancies in numerous places. And that's really the fighting back against redundancies is a key priority right now. You know, we're collating every day the hidden avalanche, if you like, of redundancies that employers are not confessing to, that mostly are casualised staff, in addition to the ones that they're making business cases for. The union in the last few weeks and months has put in a heck of a lot of work to change 20,000 members' membership details so that we can host postal ballots if a branch wants to do that in a local dispute against any kind of redundancies or cuts. When we went into the pandemic, as many members in HE will know, they have their institutional addresses, or many members do. So we've made a huge change so that can happen. I have been going to numerous branch meetings in branches that are particularly in the thick of it. So, you know, Roehampton, Reading, SOAS, and making it very clear that the union's support is here, not just nationally for press coverage, to get politician support, but to support any branches who want to take action. We are putting on a suite of events. If you're a member and you're watching this and you haven't been onto our Fund the Future website and looked at the events, there's a whole kind of platform there, from things of understanding your institution's finances so you can argue back, how to organise online, how to push back against GTA and PGR cuts, really kind of tooling up members so that in this moment, no branch is kind of forced or scared into making any concessions that they don't need to, and really holding institutions to account for their own financial mismanagement in this period. So the redundancies are a huge aspect of what we're trying to push back against, but we can also ignore that there is, you know, a looming health and safety crisis. We've already sort of addressed this in further education, which is obviously another sector that we represent, but we are very much have our eye on any return to face-to-face teaching, what that might look like, what we need to do from a health and safety perspective to ensure that nobody goes back before it's safe. We've already made our position on this very clear, but the fragmented approach across the sector of what institutions intend to do, which has not been helped by the complete uncertainty of any funding, means that we do have, you know, just mushrooming up everywhere, a bit like the redundancies, what we do in branches. So, you know, we're incredibly busy. I'm incredibly proud of all the UCU staff who are doing all of this from their homes during a pandemic, just like all of our members are. But that's what we're essentially doing, kind of tooth and nail, toe to toe on the ground in those branches, directing support from HQ. Paul's team, of which I remember, Jane, as you know, we've generated more support from ever, from head office, from campaigns, from bargaining and negotiation, and targeting at branches. So absolutely kind of all over it, really. But I think the forfights issues, you know, mainly the kind of the equalities aspect, the casualisation and the workload, they are very much manifesting in what we're doing now, but with the additional challenge of pushing back against redundancies. You're on mute. We lasted 39 minutes.
Sorry. We just had a question actually from Mark Abel about a practical question about have members' addresses been changed from institution to home by headquarters, or do members still need to do that individually? And my understanding is members would need to change that individually. If we're going to a ballot period, is it better that people do that? I think
if you're in a branch and you're wanting to ballot, it's always best for you to be emailing your members and telling them that. But we took the initiative at the beginning, so of doing that where we could and being proactive about it. So we now have that in place. But if you are a branch and you're wanting to move towards that, belts and braces. But we're very confident now that we've got that in place because we proactively did that.
Thank you. Paul, did you want to say anything else? No?
No, not at the moment, Jane, thanks.
Joe, are you? Okay. Well, I'd just like to thank everybody, to thank Joe and Paul taking the time to sort of explain the results and what it means for us going forward, and to thank Pri, our interpreter, who's been on the screen with us, and also to thank Ed Bailey, who's behind the screen but making all the magic happen. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you soon.